Hello, you awesome, gorgeous specimen of a fine human. How are you doing today? I appreciate you checking back and checking out my humble podcast. We've got a good one for you guys today. This week, it's all about the music industry, baby, but we're not talking about all the bad stuff. We've done a few episodes on that now, and we all know what the bad sides of the music industry are. This time, we're talking to a guy who's been in the business over 40 years, who knows the game. He knows how to sail the storms, and he's going to share with us the inside knowledge and the pearls of wisdom that have led him to be continually successful from 1982 right into 2022 and still going strong. And what's more, he's not an artist with an axe to grind or a grudge to bear. He's actually on the big bad label side of it. He's a CEO of a major record company. We've done a lot of moaning on this podcast, and rightfully so, about the music industry. So it's going to be really interesting to get their scoop on what they see from their side of the table about the machinery of the record business, and to get their advice as well on what the rest of us can do to sail these waters. So don't tell me I'm not good to you guys. And in exchange for being so goddamn good to you, I want to ask you a favor. I want to ask all of you to go to my Spotify page or my Apple Music page or Amazon Music, whichever big, bad, horribly exploitative big tech company you listen to my music on, if you listen to it at all, please go there and follow my page. So, for example, on Spotify, it would be James Kennedy. Remember, I'm not the blonde DJ douche from the reality TV show. I'm the scowly-looking, pissed-off, black-haired British guy, okay, with the heavy music. So go and follow that page. Give me a listen, and hopefully when there's some new releases coming up, you'll be the first to know. All that shit really is so easy for people to do, but it really does help the algorithm, which we're all, slaves to, unfortunately, these days as content creators. So if you could just take a goddamn few seconds to hunt down James Kennedy on your music streaming platform of choice, give me a follow, give me a subscribe, whatever you got to do, it would really help me out. Thank you so much. It's a shame we have to live like this, but hey, what are you going to do? You got to go where the people are, man. And hey, if there's anybody who's like 90 and wants to actually buy my CD, all of that is available on Bandcamp as well. James Kennedy, not the DJ blonde douche from America, the scouty looking pissed off guy with the rock band. That's me. But look, you guys didn't come here to be sold some more shit, okay? You came here to get away from all that shit. So let's get down to the good stuff. Joining us today, let's do it, Brian Slagel is the founder and CEO of the iconic Metal Blade Records, the label responsible for introducing the world to more legendary metal bands than we've got time to list, including Slayer and Metallica. The current roster includes Behemoth, Killswitch Engage, Cannibal Corpse, GWAR, Whitechapel, and literally pages more. An influential and important figure in the history of metal, and a man who's been in the industry for 40 years. Brian Slagel, thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today. How are you doing, sir?
Good, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You are welcome anytime, brother. Thank you for joining us. Before we kick off then, I know this is probably going to be like a really massive ask, but for the three people who don't know who Brian Slagel is and Metal Blade Records are, could you give us like the brief kind of 1 minute bio on the story so far?
Brief, yeah, that's always easy for 40 years, right? Basically, I was a young, dumb kid in 1981 and was completely obsessed with a scene called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal that was happening over in England, which of course consisted of Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, and many, many other acts. Completely got obsessed with it, I grew up in Los Angeles, California. So living in Los Angeles, and, this is obviously eons before the internet or anything else, it was very difficult to get information, but somehow I was able to do that. I was really heavily into the scene. Then my dream job became available. I started working at a record store, which I grew up listening to music. I grew up going to record stores since I was like 11. And always the dream job. So I worked at this really cool independent record store, started importing all the European heavy metal stuff. And that was kind of I started the first ever US heavy metal fanzine called the New Heavy Metal Review, yep. REVUE. I don't know why we did that, but anyway, so I was working at the record store, and one of my friends who used to come in a lot and buy stuff said, there's heavy metal bands here in Los Angeles. And I said, there are? At that point, I had no idea. So he said, yeah. So the first show I went to was Rat and Motley Crue at a venue called the Troubadour in Hollywood on a Wednesday night for $1.
Wow.
And then I realized, wow, there are heavy metal bands in LA. So started realizing there's a whole scene. And again, this is, 1981, and, there's the major labels don't care. There's no internet. There's no way of anybody knowing that these bands would exist. So I got the idea, kind of based on the new wave of British heavy metal and the kind of do-it-yourself attitude that was happening in England, to put together a compilation album of LA heavy metal bands, which I did. Ended up selling a few. Rat was on there for one. And also this band called Metallica was on there as well, because I had become friends with Lars, and he said, if I put together a band, can I be on a record? And I said, sure. And that ended up being Metallica. And then things kind of just slowly snowballed from there, where I got a distribution deal because they had no money to do anything, which is why we never put out a Metallica record or anything. Right. But this distributor said, we'll give you a deal where, if you bring us stuff, we can manufacture it and sell it. So I started doing that. And then just slowly over the years, the label has grown into this, and it's 40 years later, and I'm still talking about it.
That is amazing, man. I mean, what a thing to have started and to see grow into this amazing global success story. I mean, has the trajectory been very diagonal, or have there been, significant dips and hardships that we haven't seen?
Well, so metal in the 90s was a bit difficult because obviously, grunge came in and kind of wiped it out, which quite honestly it needed to do. Like, metal was big and bloated and not my kind of metal that was happening in like the late 80s, early 90s. So grunge came in, which we actually ended up doing a lot of work with all those bands. We were with Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone and Nirvana and Soundgarden and all those bands. But so the mid 90s were a little tough. It was, honestly, for us, it wasn't terrible because the underground bands were still, we had at the time, we had, 6 Feet Under and Cannibal Corpse and GWAR and Fade and King Diamond, who were all selling a lot of records as independents, but the mainstream, it was no mainstream stuff at all. A lot of people wrote off heavy metal being dead. I remember, and I think it was 1997, Rock Hard, which is the big European German heavy metal fanzine or magazine, sorry, they had, the cover was a gravestone that said R.I.P. heavy metal, born 1969, died 1997. So a lot of people thought that was it. And then, new metal came in, which we didn't really get involved with at all. And I just knew that we would survive it because we survived other things, and we did. And then the early 2000s came and it blew up again.
Well, that survival aspect of the genre, I think, is really interesting, because I think it feels to me like metal is almost immortal by this point, because, like you say, it's survived grunge, it's survived other things, it's always been there. Have you got any thoughts as to why that might be? Do you think it's ever going to die? I don't think it is personally, but why do you think that is? It just speaks to, this music speaks to people. And, it spoke to me, when I was a 17, 18-year-old kid, and so many others of us. That was the whole scene back in the early 80s, was we never thought, any of these, bands would become big. Metallica would be like one of the biggest bands in the world. None of us thought that. We're just fans doing our thing. And luckily we found other people that were also into it. And over the years, through generations, you just see like the next generation of kids coming up. Like, we're signing so many bands now, these kids that are, anywhere from 19 to 22 and 23 that love the music, love the history of it. And, they want to create their own thing. And as long as that keeps happening, and I don't see that slowing down anytime in the near future, I think that, this genre is going to continue. And also, I think most of the people that work within our industry, whether it's, obviously musicians, but obviously the record labels and the booking agents and the managers, everybody is a fan. We're all fans. It's not like there's, I don't deal with anybody on my level that's not a heavy metal fan at all. Like everybody, like I said, everybody from this whole community. And that really helps because we're all on the same page. There's nobody, I'm not ever talking to somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about in terms of metal, whether it's the biggest managers or the biggest agents or the biggest labels. Yeah, there's just something really real and primal and raw about it. You know what I mean? If it speaks to you, then it really, really speaks to you. Like listening to fucking metal music loud, it's like therapy. It's like catharsis or something. It's transcendental. It's just, it's primal. And it's very difficult to describe, but I think for the people that it speaks to, they're in for life. You know what I mean? And I think that's another reason why it's never going to go, because it's real,
100%. And it's, look, it's an angry form of music. And I think as long as there are going to be there's going to be a lot of angst growing up. There's going to be a lot of angst in the world. So, those sort of things, I guess, kind of help the genre a little bit. But it's just one of those things where it's going so strong now. I don't see it slowing down anytime, at least in my lifetime, hopefully.
Amen, man. Do you? I'm guessing you don't just exclusively listen to metal in your personal downtime. I mean, what else do you listen to? What other genres?
Honestly, I don't listen to a lot of other stuff. I try to open myself up a bit here and there to different things because I want to experience it. Probably my all-time favorite non-metal band, even though they're kind of a little bit. You may or may not know of them because they're a British band. They're called the Manic Street Preachers.
No way. They're from around here, man.
I absolutely love them. I've been a fan of theirs since day one. So they're kind of and they're still a rock band. So it's not like, I'm going so far out of my comfort zone. But that being said, in the last few months, I actually went to a bit of a long story. I'll bumper it up, but there's a country artist in the U.S. called Morgan Wallen, who nobody outside of the country industry knows who he is. He sold more records in North America last year than any other artist.
Wow.
That Adele and anybody like by a mile.
Jesus.
So real quick, my girlfriend, who's not a country fan, wanted to go see him somewhere. So I'm like, all right. So I did the little deep dive. Turns out all the guys in his band are metal guys, and they have a side project metal band. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So I bought tickets to go see him in Shreveport, Louisiana, of all places. One of my buddies who manages Killswitch Engage, I tell him the story. He goes, the guy who's tour managing him is a really good friend of mine. He's an old school hardcore metal guy. Totally know who you were. So anyway, we got hooked up and hung out with those guys. And I've seen Morgan Wallen a few times. And while it's like I wouldn't go listen to his music over and over again, the show's great. There's fire and all sorts of stuff. And the band guys do like a little metal little jam session we saw off stage. And the last show he did, the first stadium show he played, they did a medley of Linkin Park, Def Leppard, and Bon Jovi, and he played "Pour Some Sugar on Me" by Def Leppard, which I hate. I've always hated that song, but their version was awesome, so I really kind of liked it. And then another kind of thing, and again, I wouldn't necessarily listen to his music a lot, but I know he's a big metalhead, and he's friends with a lot of friends. As Post Malone, so I went to see him a few weeks ago, and I'm friends with the guys from Power Trip, and they were there, and I guess they're good friends with him and his photographer. So anyway, Post went up and did the whole show in a Power Trip shirt.
Yeah, wow, that's fucking awesome. Yeah, but you see it, that's the thing, man. Everybody's got their guilty metal pleasure, even in a country band,
Yeah, so exactly. That's all. I will go venture out a little bit, but it's usually when there's metal involved.
Well, that's so interesting that you mentioned the Manic Street Preachers, because obviously, here in Wales, they're like our national treasure. And I'm talking to you now from about half an hour away from their hometown of Blackwood. I've met those guys several times. They're a massive, massive band over here. And my partner, funny enough, has actually sung on a few of their records and has guest vocaled with them, on live shows and TV shows and things like that. So, we know those guys very well over here. Have you ever seen them live?
Oh gosh, yes. When they first came over to the U.S. back with there was a minute when around Gold for Your Soul and the Holy Bible, where they're trying to kind of make them a big thing over here. So they did a few U.S. tours. So I saw them, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. I actually got to meet them. Super nice guys. A couple of them were big hockey fans, because Cardiff has a hockey team and has for a long time. So I'm a big hockey fan. So we got to bond over that a little bit. But yeah, I've seen them. I think the last time I saw them in LA, in fact, they just played there and I missed it, but they played in LA, and that was when they did the entire Holy Bible, which is my favorite record of theirs and probably in my top 30 records of all time.
Same.
It's one of the most brilliant albums ever. So yeah, I've seen them quite a few times. Never seen them in England though, which I would love to do.
Oh, dude, they play stadiums over here, man. If you get a chance to come and see the Manics on their home turf, then definitely do it. One thing I wanted to ask you, and staying off metal then, just for a second, and looping back to something you mentioned earlier, grunge. What did you think about grunge at the time?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. And so my first kind of foray into that a little bit, I mean, obviously, I heard Nirvana and all that stuff, but a really good friend of mine who worked at Columbia Records signed Alice in Chains. And this is pretty early on. He sent me the demo tape that he got and said, hey, I just signed this band. What do you think? And I said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, I loved it. And I went up and there was a band called Mother Love Bone that was early on, and I went up to see them in Seattle because we had a partnership with Capitol Records at the time, and the A&R person wanted me to go up and see them. So I went up and saw them, and I was blown away. I don't know if I've ever seen a singer that incredible in about a 50-seat bar or whatever it was. I mean, he was just unbelievable. And I thought this band's going to be the biggest thing ever. They were going to be amazing. And then, of course, he passed away due to an overdose. And of course, the two guys, Stone and Goss from Lebanon, went on to form some band called Pearl Jam.
I've heard of those guys. Yeah.
Did kind of okay. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I was into it. I mean, I love the Pumpkins. I love Soundgarden. All of those bands to me were just another version of metal, and they're all huge metalheads.
Yeah.
I remember I was one of my favorite Alice in Chains stories. So the Clash of the Titans tour, which was Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, were doing this big tour, but they had Alice in Chains open, kind of before anybody knew who Alice in Chains were really, and they're playing in Toronto. And Fates Warning, one of our bands, was recording their record in Toronto. So I took those guys to the show. So afterwards we go backstage and we're talking to the guys, and Lane comes up to me, and Lane was like one of the sweetest people ever, by the way. Came up to me and whispered in my ear, he's like, "Do you think it's okay if I get an autograph at Fates Warning? Like my buddy and I back home are huge fans."
Wow.
But yeah, all those bands were influenced by metal, but they couldn't say it at the time. I mean, Dave Grohl, who I've since met since then, I mean, I was told that when one of my friends was out on the very first Foo Fighters tour, and he sent us an email and said, "Dude, I'm out with Grohl on this Foo Fighters tour. Every CD in his CD case is all metal playing." I was like, "Oh wow, cool." So they were all metalheads, and it was just, like I said, it was just another version of metal to me, and I loved it. I thought it was fresh and new and different, and I thought all that stuff was great. I loved all of it.
That's interesting, man, that you would see it that way as somebody on the metal side of the industry, at that time, because I know that, grunge scared the shit out of pretty much every other genre at that time. I mean, none more so than metal. But as you mentioned earlier, I think it was a good thing because, metal was becoming a kind of cliche of itself in many ways at that point. It was becoming quite generic and lazy in many ways. So I think grunge certainly raised the bar for everything else, whereby, everyone had to start up in their game again.
Well, yeah, what happened was the major labels got involved and they just kind of made everything pop, and they had that terrible look with the whole hair metal thing, and that wasn't my version of metal, what I liked about metal. So I even thought it was awful, and it needed to be reset, and that's what happened. We went through the '90s where it had to get reset, and it reset itself, and here we are.
Yeah, stronger than ever again, man. It's back. I mean, one thing that really interests me that I'd love to ask you, we've had several music industry sort of specials on the podcast so far, but I mean, you've been in the game now for 40 years, right? And you're still here now, top of the game. So what is your opinion on the monumental shift that's happened within the music industry now? Obviously, I'm of a generation that when I sort of came on the scene, I was pretty much just one toe left in the old model. For me, it was very much MySpace. You still made CDs and things like that, but then within a space of a few years, it was social media and, Apple and streaming and all that sort of stuff. So I didn't spend too much time in the old model, but you've spent about 20 years in both now. So what's your opinion on the change? Is it better? Is it just different? What's your thoughts?
Well, it's the one thing I've learned over all these years is you have to be adapted to change. And I learned that very early on because in the 80s, I grew up in the 70s and I was a vinyl fanatic. I have tons of vinyl. I kept on my vinyl. I was the idiot at the record company. We were saying like, hey, you might want to stop pressing vinyl because CD's the new thing now. Nobody's going to want vinyl anymore. I go, no, vinyl's never going to die. And sure enough, at one point, all the stores, not only in the U.S. but in Europe, just decided like, okay, that's it. We're done with vinyl. They shipped all of it back, and that almost bankrupted the company because all of a sudden I owed our distributor like $250,000. I didn't have that money to pay them, so we somehow survived. But I learned, okay, I'm not going to be resistant to change anymore, right. And we're going to get out in front of it next time. And, kind of where this all came from was really the whole file sharing thing. And, everybody was going on and on about that and how horrible it was. And look, it wasn't great. And but I get it. I get it. I understand it from a fan. I'm still a fan first and foremost. So I understand from a fan's point of view. Like, I don't want to go spend $20 to buy a record and have there be one good song on it. This is ridiculous. So I kind of got the vibe, but it just became too much, obviously. But what that did was it forced the music industry to go, okay, we need to have a different business model here, because clearly what we were doing isn't working, and now we're being decimated by this file sharing thing. Yeah. And that really led into the whole streaming thing. So, look, as a business model, it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll give you the rough thing. So a lot of people complain about streaming. A lot of artists complain about streaming. They're not making any money. And the reason that is because most of them are signed to major labels. And I don't want to disparage all the major labels, because not all of them are bad and not all of them do this. But, all of these bands are under agreements that they sign, especially the older bands that have been around for a long time. But they're getting, normal royalty rates like 15% or something. But this is when, you're manufacturing product and all this sort of stuff. It's changed a lot now, where a band shouldn't be getting paid 15% on streaming. They should be getting paid much more. Yeah. And the independent artists like us do. And I mean, we write 6-figure checks to our bands all the time now, because this streaming thing is huge. And just from a fan's perspective, so when I grew up, right, all right, I'd have $20 to buy maybe 2 records. Yeah. And that's it. So now for $10 a month, I can listen to anything I want to, anytime I want to, anywhere I want to. So, I mean, that freedom is really made a huge impact for the music business, because bands that would normally be smaller because people couldn't listen to them or they didn't have access to them. I mean, everybody's got access to music for free, whether it's YouTube or, free streaming sites or whatever it is. So that sort of thing has done 2 things. Number one, it's got a whole bunch of smaller bands that never would be as big as they are to have the access to people listening to them. And number 2, it forced bands to make quality albums, because before that, people were like, well, I don't really have to make a really great record. I can just do 2 good songs. The rest of it, nobody's going to care about. But once you could hear everything before paying for it, you had to make good stuff. And I think that really stepped up the game of, not only just metal genres, but a lot of other genres. So in a way, I think kind of where we're at with all of this is, if it's done right, and if the labels are doing things the right way and paying the artists as they should be, then it's a great thing.
That's really interesting that you say that. So would you put your hat in the ring then and say that you actually think it's better now?
Well, better is the whole thing. I mean, I think, look, as a fan, from a fan's point of view, absolutely, I think it's better, because, you can, like I said, you can listen to anything you want to pretty much anytime you want to without having to spend a lot of money. And, the good news is then you can go out and buy the vinyl versions and the CD versions, which thankfully in our world, people do that. But yeah, I think it's better. And I think for the long term, it's getting better for the bands too. Look, it's not what it was in the 70s and 80s. It probably never will be in terms of music royalties, but compared to the way it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, this is way better. I mean, for a long time, bands made all of their money on touring and merchandise, like 90% of it. Yeah. And then music was maybe 10%. Well, now that's probably bumped up to, again, depending upon the deal, depending on how well bands stream, you could be up for anywhere from 25 to 35% of a band's overall income, which makes, all of us feel a lot better. And it's just another income source that helps these artists make it. And in all honesty, helped a lot of these artists survive the pandemic.
Great point. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. I mean, I've been an evangelist for the new model for a long time, quite openly. Because of my experience as an artist, I got shafted by so many labels back in the day that when I decided to just commit to being independent, and embrace technology and social media and all that sort of stuff, I found it very empowering. Like, just make the record I want to make, put it out, any money that was made, 100% if it came to me or the band, and it was just a lot more freeing, and I just felt a lot more validated and rewarded rather than just feeling like I was being screwed all the time. But the flip side to that is, when you're on a level playing field with everybody else on planet Earth who's also doing the same thing, how do you get heard above the noise?
Well, yeah, and that's, a lot of people could say, well, labels are going to be gone because, artists can just do all this themselves. Well, that's true. Artists can do it themselves. You don't have the infrastructure of, the label, our size, we've got like 35 employees, but then we've got distributors and other people we work with. You've got like an army of 150 different people that are out there that are promoting you and your band. So you can't do that on your own. You have to hire them or do, even like big bands that try to do it on their own, they really can't. But you do have to align yourself with the right label, because I'm the first to admit there are a lot of labels that rip off bands all the time. Yeah. I hear stories over and over again. That's the one thing that really bums me out about the industry. And it's not just the metal industry, just in general. I think it's better. I mean, so I'm into reading autobiographies now. I wrote a book 5 years ago, The History of Heavy Metal, History of Metal Blade Records, sorry. And I wanted to read some more autobiographies. So I now I'm obsessed with it. And man, no matter what artist it is, you read them, if they came up in the 70s and 80s, they all got ripped off by either managers or labels or whatever. It is always such a bummer to read that sort of stuff. But that being said, if you can align yourself with the right people, and there are a lot of good people out there, you can do well.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, and it's good to know that there are some good guys out there. Oftentimes it doesn't feel like there are. But do you think that it's possible for a band or an artist to survive and have a successful career without a label? Or do you think ultimately once you get to a certain point that it's impossible to continue to function effectively without a label?
Yeah, I think so. We haven't seen any artist yet that's really been able to kind of establish something and become a massive artist all on their own. Eventually there has to be people there. I think it's interesting, the whole TikTok world is kind of interesting now, where you're seeing, a lot of people who aren't not on labels, but have these crazy, 35 million TikTok followers and all this sort of stuff. I don't know that can transition to like a regular music career, but yeah. Somebody may end up doing it. It's an interesting platform, and it's an interesting way of getting to people. And clearly there are people that know how to do it that, I'm kind of blown away by, like, wow, that guy's, that band or guy or whatever has all these followers. So I think it's possible, but still the kind of, look, I don't want to sound old school and old fuddy-duddy, but that's still business model of, the record label, and it's got to be the record label, the management, the agent, everybody all working together to really get an artist to that next level. You've seen with some of the pop artists, they can start on their own, but eventually they got to go somewhere.
Yeah, from my own experience, it was kind of like, I went from the feeling of, wow, this is fucking awesome. I can just make the record I want now. I can put it out. I can play everything, produce it myself. It doesn't cost a penny. I can distribute it, digitally, and use Bandcamp or whatever and social media to promote myself. This is fucking awesome. But the first place that it then falls down is touring, because touring is so fucking expensive that most bands on the sort of money that they're realistically going to be making from streaming and things like that can't afford to put on a nationwide tour. You just can't do it. It's too expensive. And there were other things, like promotion and marketing and stuff. But I think touring, that obviously any musical artist wants to be out there touring. That's what they should be doing, right? That's what we live. That's why we do this. Unless you just want to exist on the internet or something. But most of us want to be out there playing. And that I think is the first real big hurdle that most independent artists come up against when they're trying to do this without a label.
Yeah, 100%. We see that now. I think the great thing about, being able to make records, on your own and make them for free and get them out there is that starts the ball rolling. Because, I don't think we signed I don't want to say any, but rarely do we sign a band these days that just is coming. They've not put anything out. They've not done anything before. Like usually these bands put out, an EP or something on their own. And they've gained some traction and there's stuff going on. And then, we kind of pick it up from there. Any other label can kind of pick it up from there and get it to that next level. And that's a great way to really help artists to start on their own, but start with their vision too, so that they, because sometimes labels and management can mess up your vision, which it should not ever, by the way. By the way, all the bands out there, don't ever listen to anybody. Make whatever music you guys want to make. Don't listen to anybody. Don't listen to spouses or friends or labels or managers. Don't listen to anybody, period. Never.
That's great advice. But definitely do listen to Brian.
Well, you can listen to what I'm saying about his other stuff, but I'm not gonna tell you what you should and should not be doing musically. That's for sure.
Well, amen to that, man. Because that's few and far between these days. There's a lot of noise out there these days, man. I was going to ask you, like, with regards to touring, how have you seen that side of the industry change? Because I mean, certainly at the sort of level that I operate at over here with my band, at the club level, obviously small clubs are closing down left, right, and center. They're not keeping their doors open for various reasons. What's your experience of that within the metal world?
Yeah, well, the pandemic was scary, obviously, because like you just mentioned, a lot of smaller clubs didn't survive. But it seems like other people are kind of coming up and filling in the gaps a little bit now. But touring is really weird. So when I first started out, and even going back to 20 some odd years ago, like artists to get out on the road, because like you said, it's not easy. It's not easy. Especially your first tours, you're not going to be making any money. You're going to have to quote unquote pay your dues. And back in our days, I mean, bands would Slayer's first tour they did in a station wagon. They just slept on people's floors.
Yeah.
They did whatever they could. They didn't care because they loved the music and they're out there to promote their own music. And I've seen that doesn't exist a lot anymore. Where a lot of bands now, younger bands, come in and go, well, we need we don't want to do a tour in a van. We want to be in a bus and all those sort of things. Like, well, that's not going to work. You kind of got to go out and pay your dues a little bit more. That being said, there are still other bands that are out there kind of doing what they need to do to make it happen. And that's super important to begin with, because it's going to take a while for you to have anything, especially on a touring front out there. But then again, that's and this is also I feel bad saying this, but again, having the label and the management people around you gets you on those good tours. And gets you a little bit more money than you would normally have gotten, because you've got people surrounding them who, especially the agents and the venues, trust you a little bit because they know, okay, well, they're with these people, so okay, they might be good.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what do you think then about the power of luck? How important is the power of luck in a band's success? Because, it doesn't mean that they're not good. It doesn't mean that they haven't worked their ass off, but the music industry is not a meritocracy. Most things aren't. So how important, in your experience of what you've seen of bands over the years, has the power of luck been in their success or lack of?
Absolutely, it's important. There's so many bands out there, so many artists, and there's so many people vying for something that, luck absolutely plays a big role in it. I think that being said, you still, what's the old saying? You got to be lucky to be good. You got to be good to be lucky, right?
Right.
So you do have to be good. You do have to be smart. You do have to know what you're doing. But just sometimes luck plays a huge thing. I mean, there's countless bands that we all could say that. And luck could mean a lot of different things. Luck could mean, being in the right place at the right time to have the right, manager or agent, or, whatever that may be. Because we all know there's tons of bands that we love that we go, why did that band never make it big? They were so great. There's always a story. It's, involved with the wrong people, or, somebody, the singer's, girlfriends or parents said, no, you got to go to school, or whatever it is. And, people just don't take the chance. So, there's all that sort of stuff. And luck can just be, luck can play a major role in all this sort of stuff, because there's a million great artists and not all of them are going to make it.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad to hear you say that, man, because that's just not been my experience as someone that's been around musicians and very talented creative people now for, several decades. And, you hear all these things all the time from, music seminars and books and, industry advice and stuff like that, if you're just professional, you work hard and you pay your dues and you're nice to everybody and all that sort of stuff, that, success will be forthcoming. But it's just not true, I don't think, because I know so many people who are so talented, they write such great music and they bust their ass, they do everything that you're supposed to do, they make all the sacrifices year after year after year, and they just, for some reason or another, just cannot catch a break,
Yeah, and it's, that's all over all the genres. Like I live in Las Vegas, and I see all these incredibly talented people that, work at lounges and shows and stuff that are unbelievably talented, but they never got the big break because they weren't right place, wrong time, or, they were from Omaha and nothing ever happened in Omaha. There's a lot of stuff like that for sure.
And so then, do you see in the successful bands any commonalities? I mean, do you see any characteristics that the bands that stick, the ones that stick around, not the ones who manage to catch a lucky break, but then they're gone this time next year, the one-hit wonders or whatever. What do you see as the common traits in those bands, whether you've worked with them directly or not? Those bands that stick, what traits do they share?
They're smart.
Right.
They're smart, and they understand the business. And what I tell every band is it's just got to be one guy. It doesn't have to be a whole band. You guys don't all have to learn about the music industry, but one guy, at least one guy in the band, has to do the business.
Right.
It has to understand the business and has to do it. And that's no matter what successful band that is, or on any level, you've got that one guy, whether it's Lars and Metallica or, Steve Harris and Iron Maiden, or, you go on and on and on, but there's always one guy that understands the business, that knows what they're doing, and they work with all the team around them to make it. And it's the same thing with all of our bands. Like every band's got at least one guy that understands the business part of it. He controls the business part. And that's the one thing I can say for every single popular band I've ever dealt with. There's always at least one person, if not more, but at least one. Because you've got to be smart. It's a difficult business. Everybody's going to try to rip you off. If you don't know what you're talking about, what you're doing, and fight for your band, then yeah, you can let the pitfalls happen easily.
That's great advice. Yeah, I didn't see that one coming, man. Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, as you were speaking then, I could think of countless examples of my own, like the Rolling Stones or Queen, they've all got that one guy in the band that is the business guy, so that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
So what do you have any thoughts on, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, one of the main things that you have to have in this business on your side of the table is to be easily adaptable to change, because there's going to be a lot of it. Have you got any theories as to what the future of the music industry might look like, say, in 10 years' time? I know it's probably impossible these days because everything changes so fast, because it's now based so much on technology. But have you got any feeling, seeing the patterns as you have over the past 40 years as to where things might be headed? Do you think streaming is here to stay, or do you think something else is around the corner?
Well, you never know, right? I'm not going to tell you right now that I think in 10 years that streaming is going to still be as strong as it is now, because some other platform could come into play. You certainly see, social media, which I'm a big fan of, and honestly has played a massive role in the success of our label and the other labels, just because we have this amazing platform. We can reach out to our fans directly from us, between our, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all these different pages. There's like 3 million people that, you can reach to, which is, kind of mind boggling when you think about it for, an independent label. But all that being said, who knows? I mean, I think for the next few years, the model that we have now is going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
But we also, you don't know, look at what's happening with Twitter now.
Yeah.
Twitter is, which I love Twitter. I've always been a big fan. I've always had great experiences there. Now for now it seems like it's surviving, but who knows? So who knows what could happen? If Spotify or Apple could, do something crazy and not become what they were before. But then again, somebody else could come in and do something too. But I do think you're going to see, these things like TikTok and stuff where, once you can properly monetize things, I guess, Twitch is another good one where you can actually monetize things there. So once you can kind of monetize stuff there, I think that's going to be a bit of a game changer, especially for artists. Like we have some artists that, and not everybody can get into Twitch, and not everybody's got that mentality to get in there. And it's, it's gone beyond, I think, from even being just a gaming thing now. But, we've got a couple artists that, that do a bunch of really cool stuff on Twitch, and they make a bunch of money every month just for themselves. So I think if artists can kind of get into those sort of things and create interesting things that can give them extra money, that's going to help. But I think from our point of view, from a label point of view, I think it's just the next few years is going to be kind of where it is now. I hope that the physical product continues to exist, because I love that stuff. And certainly vinyl's bigger now than it's ever been. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon, but you can't ever know.
Yeah, it's impossible to predict. And also, predictions have been proven to be wrong more than they're right anyway. So best we just wait and see. But one thing, we can guarantee is safe. And I think that's the most important thing is music. Music is not going anywhere. The format will clearly change in ways that we can't even imagine yet. But people's love and need for music is not going anywhere. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and you see, I go to so many shows and just see so many young kids. I just saw Iron Maiden in New York a couple months ago, and think about Iron Maiden, they're in their 60s, and Nico's 70.
Yeah.
But the crowd is I'd say half the crowd is under 30. It's just amazing to see these generational things happen now. It's the same. I saw Monomarth 2 weeks ago. It's the same thing. That their crowd is probably 20 to 40 is probably the main demographic there. And, they've been around for a minute, so I like that because that means there's the next generation coming in that is enjoying the music. So that makes me feel good about the long haul. But yeah, the formats, who knows?
Do you think social media plays a part in that? Because I've noticed that myself. I go to concerts and I'm expecting to see a certain demographic, and I'm like, shit, man, it's full of teenagers. I didn't see that coming. How do they even know this band? Do you know what I mean? Do you think that is, to do with TikTok and social media?
Oh, 100%. I think social media drives so much stuff these days for people that's how we get our information out as a record label. And, you get so many people that use social media to learn something. That's what I do too. I found bands on social media. Somebody just sent me some TikTok artist the other day. I'm not a huge fan of it, but the guys got 30, 5 million followers, some crazy amount of followers. And it's really interesting, but that's how it works. And, you see, some kid will see a band and they'll tag their friend, or Snapchat or whatever it is. But yeah, that's 100%. It's all social media, because how else would you know about these bands, right?
Yeah, for sure. And do you think a band can survive without that these days? I know so many friends of mine, they might be insane musicians and amazing bands, but they're like, oh, I'm not very good with this. I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to be dancing on TikTok and doing some shit like that. So they just don't bother. But if you're not on the phone, everyone's staring at their phone. People are looking at their phone when they're driving these days. If you're not on there, then essentially you don't exist. Do you think it's possible for a band to exist and survive or even climb the ladder starting out from scratch without social media, or do you think it's absolutely essential?
I would never say never, but it would be extremely difficult because you're just losing an outlet. Look, you don't have to do a dumb dance on TikTok, but you do have to be part of, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, all these accounts. If you don't, as a band, have all those pages going, then nobody's going to know who you are. How, in this day and age, how would somebody find out about a band if you're not on social media anyway? It's just, it's just impossible. There's no other way unless, you became, the band was on a reality show or something.
Yeah.
No, out of nowhere. But yeah, unfortunately, that's the game you got to play now. But I think it's great because this way with social media, you learn about things and you find out about bands. And there's so many people I never would have met. Or,
True.
you and I might not be talking now, but with social media, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Do you think there's any space left embracing social media as well simultaneously, but do you think there's still space left for the old punk rock model of hitting the streets and flyers and posters on lampposts and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think that still is a component of what's happening. And I encourage, people ask me what should bands do? I'm a band in whatever city. It's and they all want to get a record deal quickly. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who's like, yeah, these guys have this artist they want to get really big, and they want me to ask you. I'm like, oh. So we'll tell them this, you're not gonna cold call or cold email a record label or something and have them sign it. Just not gonna happen.
Right.
So what you do is, whatever city you're in, make that city your town. Go out and play shows. Like you said, fly or make that city yours. Because generally is what happens, where all of a sudden, because we've got people all over the world, right? So we signed a band from Knoxville, Tennessee, this band of Whitechapel. Knoxville, Tennessee is this little tiny town in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. No one's ever come from there. But they became this big artist in Knoxville, and one of the clubs there said, hey, you should check out this band. They've been playing here and they're doing really well. And we did, and it was like, oh my gosh, this band's amazing. We ended up signing them. That's kind of the way you have to do it. So I don't know if you could become a huge artist without, again, playing the game that we have to play now, that we talked about. But certainly starting out, that's the number one way. If you're starting out, you got to just take where you're at and be as big as you can in that market and get as much buzz and noise going as you can there.
And I guess in many ways, it's the same as it always was, back in the day. I suppose, that's all you had. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for the artists that we deal with, 100%.
So how does a band get on a label's radar? What do you look for? I know that's probably a stupid question that you've answered loads of times before, and every case is probably different. But I mean, you mentioned cold calling with emails and stuff like that. Yeah, we know that's redundant now. So what is a kick-ass band that's paid their dues, that's out there, they've got their hometown in their pocket, but Brian Slagel still has never heard of them. What does a band do to get on your radar?
Well, usually if that's happening, it'll get on our radar. Like I said, we get enough people around the world that we deal with, and all of our bands tour, and half the time you'll get one of our bands, they go into a city and they hear about a band that the club owner said, hey, you guys should check these guys out, and here's their demo or whatever. So it'll eventually, like if there's a really good band, it'll eventually get to somebody. That being said, the other advice that I think is really, really important for bands, especially in our world, is don't sound like anybody else.
Yeah,
because that's not what we're looking for. Like we have Whitechapel, we have Amon Amarth, we have all these bands. But I don't want another band that sounds like that. I want to sign a band that sounds different. So what I try to tell these guys is, it's great to have your influences. It's great, you can be a fan of all those bands, but don't sound like them. Take those influences, do something that first and foremost you as a band like. Again, don't listen to anybody else nonsense. But do something that you guys like, but make it different. Make your own unique sound, because that's what's going to get. If you're going to be a big band in this genre, really any genre, if you're not doing something different and unique, people are more than likely not. They'll care to a certain degree, but it's like I'd rather listen to Amon Amarth than a band that sounds like a.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the need for that is so much more these days, because you're not just competing with the 5 other bands in your hometown now. You're essentially in competition with the rest of the world. The gazillion other bands who are also, online in the collective social media space. So I think the risk of sounding like another band is so much higher, and I think therefore the need to carve out your own sound is so much more important, so that you stand out above that noise.
Correct, but there's a danger to that too, because if you're doing something so far out there, so different, and you're not part of any scene, that really hurts you too. Because we've signed bands that I love, that I thought this band's amazing, and they're doing something completely different, but then they don't exist in a scene. So people don't really understand them or don't get them because they're not part of whatever genre or scene it is. So it's a tricky thing, because you want to be different and unique, but you also still want to somehow be involved in whatever that scene is, just so you get those. Because fans are not going to immediately go out and listen to something completely different. It's going to take them a while. And if you're part of a scene and you do have a unique sound, that's a little bit better.
100%, and that's a really important point that I hope any bands listening to this are really gonna see the importance of that, of being part of a broader scene whilst having your own unique place within it. I think that's the magical formula right there. And so which bands are you currently listening to then that are ticking those boxes? Whether you're working with them on Metal Blade, or whether you're just they're on your radar. What are you listening to that's getting your blood up? What's getting your juices flowing? What should we be checking out?
There's a couple things. Not on the Metal Blade agenda, and I don't know. So I was a huge fan, obviously, of the early Queensrÿche stuff. Like the first 4 records were, some of the best metal records ever. And I'm friends with those guys and stuff. And they over the years, whatever. And I just saw them. They opened for Judas Priest about a year or so ago in Vegas, and they were amazing. New singer Todd's great guy, sounds amazing, and they were awesome. But they just played the hits. So the new record comes out, and they've had a couple records out. I'm kind of like, whatever. So one of my really good friends is this guy, Chris Santos, who is a big celebrity chef here in the U.S. He's on this TV show called Chopped. He's got a bunch of restaurants, but he's a massive metalhead. And he usually gets to stuff before I do. So he texted me and said, hey, have you heard this new Queens record? It's really good. I said, well, I actually listened to the first song was on one of the music choice channels or something I listened to. I thought it was actually really good. So the record's really good. So I went out and bought the record. Oh my God, it's incredible. It's like, I don't know where 30 years went, but this new Queensrÿche record is phenomenal. So I'm completely obsessed with that at the moment, which I love, love, love. Another band that I'm really kind of obsessed with that's not on Metal Blade is this punk rock band called the Linda Lindas.
Okay.
They're 11 to I think 18 now. The drummer's 11, the bass player's like 13, guitar players are I think 16 and 18. All girl band, and they're incredible. They write amazing songs. They have great energy. They're really, really cool. So they put out their debut album, came out on my friend's Epitaph label a while ago. So they're super cool. So, but it's like old school, like, I don't know, like early Go-Go's meets like a punk rock band. It's hard to describe it. They're super, super fun and really good for these young kids to be that good musically and writing those sort of songs. Is kind of crazy. So I love those two bands. Then metal wise, we signed this band, and this band called 200 Stab Wounds. And like I'm super old, right? I don't get excited by much. I see bands all the time, and I mean I like a lot of bands, but I don't get like, oh my god, that's amazing. Like I did with the Linda Lindas, for example. So anyway, they played at this festival called Psycho Fest in Vegas over the summer. Oh my god, this band blew me away. Like live. So good. Like I'm super, super excited about them. They have a new record coming out. And it's kind of like, the only way to describe them is they're like part Cannibal Corpse, part Power Trip, I guess. Really young kids. And my goodness, they're doing something really unique and different that we're super excited about. There's a nice buzz on them too, which is really good. But I'm super excited for that thing.
That's awesome, man. Well, there's a couple of suggestions there for people to rush out and check out. And just listening to you talk, man, I can tell that even after all these years in the biz, you're still just as enthusiastic and just as excited and just as passionate about music, And I wonder whether at its core, that's the key to your success and Metal Blade's success, is that you're essentially still, that kid with the fanzine.
I'm still just a fan. I think that's what works. Is I'm still a fan. I still love the music as much as I always have. I still get excited about new stuff. Like the new Metallica track came out, and I thought, oh my god, this is great. I love it. So yeah, I'm just a music fan, and I'm lucky to get to work in the same sort of genres I like to listen to.
Yeah, what a life, man! What a life! And what's coming up at Metal Blade? What can we look out for on the label coming up soon?
Oh gosh, there's so much stuff. So we've got a brand new Cannibal Corpse record coming out sometime in the first part of next year, I think. Then we've got a whole bunch of other stuff coming up. So we should, and I wish I could give you like dates on these things, but there will be sometime in the next few months 2 new Merciful Fate songs. They're going to be up on the socials and the streaming services. Then there should be a full King Diamond record sometime in 2023.
Nice.
And then a full Merciful Fate record in 2024. So we're super excited about that sort of stuff. And then just, go to the website. There's so much stuff going on. There's, everybody's doing all the bands are putting out records, and because we're in this process now where we had 2 years where nobody could do anything, so everybody's recording in those 2 years. So now our problem is, how do we put this stuff out but not kind of compete with everybody else, right, and fall all over ourselves? So it's a very, all of us labels now have a very unique thing about how we get all these records out and do it properly, right?
Yeah, I suppose it's a good problem to have that we got all this good music in the pipeline.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I've noticed is that there's so almost every new record by whatever band it is. Like I just mentioned Queensryche. The pandemic did one good thing. It's going to create a lot of really amazing art for all of us to listen to, I think, because all these COVID albums that have come out have been all pretty amazing.
Well, interestingly, that kind of takes us right back to the start of the conversation about what you said about metal. And as long as there's stuff to push against and rebel against and shout about, then there's always going to be metal. And God knows we've got a lot to shout about these days.
There you go. Exactly.
Well, Brian, look, man, it's been brilliant to chat with you. Thanks so much for taking time out. I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate you stopping by to chat with us today and to share all these pearls of knowledge and wisdom with us. And also, thank you for everything you've done for the scene for the past 40 years in giving us all this, fucking awesome music to shove into our ears and our hearts. We appreciate you, and long may you continue to reign, my friend.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Oh, anytime at all. Thanks again, Brian. We'll catch you again soon, mate. Take care.
Man, take care.
Brian Slagel, ladies and gentlemen, put it together for him. What a cool dude, man, and what a nice guy. After everything that he's done and achieved, to see that he's still such a grounded, normal, nice, cool dude whose real passion and love really still is just the love of music. You know, that I like to see that, because there's so many fucking dickheads in this business, isn't there, you know? But I've got a theory, and Brian, once again, is just another case in point that proves my theory correct. That of all the fucking idiots I've met in this business, and there are many, they're mostly the people down at the bottom who aren't really doing anything. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's loads at the top as well, but they're mostly, again, guys who aren't really doing anything. They're kind of guys whose job role, who don't really know what they do, bar shovel coke up their nose and write checks. You know what I mean? They're not actually doing the heavy lifting. And it's the same down the bottom as well. You know, you got the local fucking rock stars who, you know, because they play in their local hometown and they've got like one EP doing okay on Spotify or something, they think they're fucking made, you know, and they strut around like fucking Axl Rose or something like that, you know, and it's like, dude, calm yourself down. You know what I mean? Get back to me like next year or the year after, when it's all come crashing down again and you've been screwed sideways by absolutely everybody in the game. Then maybe you'll be a bit more of a, you know, a grounded human being. And then you take someone like Brian. If you look at everything he's achieved, you know, he's got nothing to prove at this point. He doesn't even need to keep going to work now. You know, he can hang up his hat and sit back and pat himself on the back. But, you know, he's a nice guy. You can have a straight conversation with him. He's a cool dude. He didn't think twice about answering any of my questions and sharing his insights that he's gleaned from 40 years of hard work. And I think that's the difference. So if you're a band starting out, be more like Brian. Don't be like people who I'm not going to name from my hometown that think that they're crafted out of gold by Jesus himself because they can play a few fucking chords on a guitar. It's hilarious, man. Anyway, I don't know what set me off on that tangent, but thanks again to Brian Slagel for stopping by and sharing his pearls of knowledge with us and giving us some recommendations for some cool bands to check out as well. I really hope you enjoyed listening to the podcast. As always, I am going to nag you because I do it every single time and I don't know if you listen, so I'm going to keep doing it until you do. Please subscribe to the podcast. It's literally a click of one button. It doesn't cost you anything and it's easy to do. You can do it. Please go and do it. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, you know, wherever you get your podcasts. It will really help me out. If you want to click the star rating button as well, again, this shit's easy to do, man. You just click a fucking button, for God's sake. If you could leave me a star rating, that would also be really helpful as well to like help, you know, nudge me up the listings and recommendations for the algorithm god that we all have to give blood to. And if you want to check out my music as well, that would be pretty awesome. Even if you think it's shit, you know, just help a brother out, dude. Come on. You know, if you enjoy the podcast, but you hate me or you hate my music, then, you know, I see that as a fair trade. You can give me a click. You can give me a like. You can give me a thumbs up in exchange for the, you know, for all this good free advertising, free shit that I give you. There are tons more bangers coming up, so watch this space, and I'll be back next week with another episode with another awesome guest. In the meantime, have an awesome week. I love you loads. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I will catch you next time. Take it easy.